Hey there, everyone. Welcome to The Great Retention with Camber Parker, sponsored by the Yo Pro Know. I'm Camber, your young professional expert and founder of the Yo Pro Know, where we bring you the answers you need to know about how to hire and retain the best talent, starting with the young professionals you work with. There's a lot of young professional fish in the sea, as I like to say, but how do you catch them? And what do you do once you reel them in? That's where we come in. Today, I am very excited to have Derek Pedersen join us, founder, author, chocolatier, and serial entrepreneur coming to us for here in Greenville, South Carolina. Derek and I were introduced more than 3 years ago through Furman University when we got paired up as an unofficial mentor-mentee pair. Since then, we've kept in touch, and Derek has helped me go through the many ups and downs of running a business, which I'm sure some of you listening and watching can understand. He's guided me through dozens of sales and general entrepreneurship conversations, many sales conversations. And I'm really lucky to have him here today for these reasons, but also because he comes with the background of not only building a successful startup, but hiring and developing good talent during his tenure, including young professional talent. So we can't wait to dive into all the details with you today, Derek. But just before we get started, thank you for being such a wonderful mentor to me. I'm really lucky. And like we said before we started, it's so cool to be here today. So thanks for joining us.
No, thank you. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for having me. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, I'm excited. So just to kind of get things started off in a lightning round, as I like to say, let's talk a little bit more about your background, just to set the stage for people who might not know you or your background. Tell us a little bit about your company. Obviously, I said founder at the beginning, and we'll talk more about the serial entrepreneur meaning, but tell us about the company that kind of started it all, and maybe what was that bug that you had however many years ago that got you to where you are today?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, in your introduction, didn't really say what my first thing was.
Well, that's what I want to hear all about Fusion today. Yeah.
So I the first company I built was Fusion Web Clinic. It was software for pediatric OT, PT, and speech therapists. So healthcare, SaaS software, kind of a high growth startup. Built that for 10 years, sold it in 2018. And I think we had like 7 years in a row with 100% plus growth. Some of those are like 200, 300% years early on. So that was just really crazy. Started in software, and that was kind of my first foray. I've always loved building stuff. So I got a degree in mechanical engineering. There's this funny story where I took apart a VCR when I was a kid and put it back together, and it didn't work, and my dad wasn't happy about it. VCRs are really complicated. So I've just always loved building things. Yeah, I definitely did. I've always been that way. Not sure why.
Well, 2018. So obviously there's been some time since then, and you have taken on, obviously I mentioned, Chocolatier, you are an author. Tell us about some of the things that you have in the works right now that might be applicable to some of the stuff we're talking about today.
Yeah. So too many things going on. So, I have ADHD, which really explains it, but I did a semester as a professor at Furman University as their first entrepreneur in residence, and then I wrote a children's book, and then I started making chocolate as a hobby that turned into a business. Doing that a little bit differently, I kind of invented a makeshift N95 mask for a hospital system. As kind of a volunteer effort that also turned into other stuff. It was it's been crazy. But now I'm settled down a little bit more. So now I have kind of two concerted efforts. Both of them are in chocolate, way different than software, but a lot of the same principles. Yeah. And so one is kind of a local community impact company that we're trying to get off the ground for kind of very custom experience chocolate. So, company logos on chocolate, really cool packaging, that sort of thing, with the focus of doing community good. And then the other one is a kind of a much bigger retail scale chocolate that we can talk a little bit more about that later. That's a teaser. We won't say exactly what that is yet.
All right, cool.
That's exciting.
Thanks for the teaser. But just something that, I think there's a pattern here, obviously. And like you said, this is, you're doing a lot, but it's not your first time doing this. Like you've founded a company, you've sold the company. And so some of these you can say are repeatable processes, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's something that I'm definitely learning a lot as a first-time entrepreneur. And we're both involved in the Next Innovation Center in different capacities, of course. But I think that's been a big theme that I've kind of heard recently is, there are those repeat offenders, if you will, repeat entrepreneurs. And so I think it's interesting. You can probably move a little quicker with your second, third, fourth ventures?
Yeah, I think you can. I would say it's repeatable but different. So every time you do something, it's a little bit different. So if you try to repeat exactly the same thing, I don't think it works. Same with hiring. Like I'm hiring differently now than I was before. I'm using a lot of the same principles, but I'm just realizing there's some things that, after having 5 years away from doing that stuff, that I've kind of like, oh, hey, we did this differently, or this didn't work, or I want to do something different. So there's just, there's a lot of things you can repeat, but you got to mix it up a little bit.
Yeah,
I think.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for clarifying that. So now let's jump into more of the topic that we want to discuss today, which is, of course, talking about the young professional generation. So that, of course, makes up the Gen Z and millennials. Not all Gen Z are currently in the workforce yet. There are some young ones. So we're really looking just about 5 years worth of Gen Z and the majority millennials. But these two groups will make up 2/3 of the workforce by 2030. So help us set the stage by talking about this from a talent and development stance.
Yeah, so the first thing I think that's interesting is that you lump millennials and Gen Z. So I'm probably, depending on what time range you look at on the internet, I'm probably at the very, very front end of millennials. And so my sister, who's 7 years younger than me, I think is quite a bit different in many ways than I am. Maybe is deeper into that millennial generation. And then I think Gen Z, like all the people I'm currently interviewing right now, I think would fall into that Gen Z category. And it is different than, and even me as like a millennial. So I think that's a really interesting point. I also think, the world just changes, and you either change with it or you don't. And so I was literally at the gym this morning talking about hiring, and we're just talking about how much the world has changed. And, there was one person there that was complaining about it. And I was just thinking in my head, there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
I mean, you can impact the world in certain ways, but for this particular case, there's really nothing you can do about it. And so you just kind of have to adjust with it. And, there may be certain values or things that you don't want to adjust with the times, which I think is very acceptable. I think that's, the way it has been for all of history. But I think if you don't adjust your practices to just make you the most successful you can be, like you're gonna be in trouble. Yeah. So the statement of like, oh, I can't believe I just can't pay someone more money and they'll be happy like things used to be. I have to like have a good culture and do all this stuff is, probably a statement I've said before in some ways, but it's just not a good excuse. You just have to be, I would say my word for this is more intentional about the way you're setting up hiring, working with employees, because at the end of the day, I want my companies to be successful. And the easiest way to do that is if my employees are really happy and they're working really hard and I hire the right people. And so the only way to do that is to make sure that your processes and your strategies fit that. And you can fight it all you want, but you'll just, maybe go the way of Blockbuster at the end of the day. So,
Well, you kind of jumped to another question that I wanted to ask, which was about what do you say to those company leaders that are not catching up to the change? Because when I talk to companies, I always say things are not changing. They've already changed. And the pandemic really expedited, I think, that shift that we've seen in the workplace. So if you can kind of expand on what you just said, what do you say to those leaders that are like, nope, Gen Z are lazy, we don't want to work with them? I mean, there are people that tell me that. So what do you say to them?
I would say, I get it. Change sucks. And like nobody likes change. It's just hard. I think we're creatures of habit. We like routine. So when we have to change, it's exhausting. So you have to do everything that you normally have to do running a company, and you have to change all your processes at the same time to adapt. Like it's not fun. And so I don't know. I think maybe I had the advantage of being, just on the front end of millennials. So maybe that made it easier. I'm not really sure, but I would just say, I know it's hard. I know it's not fun, but are you going to fight this forever? It's just, I think of, just this image in my head of this, crotchety 95-year-old man that, just goes around telling people how it used to be. And when you're 95, you can do that, by the way. Like that's totally cool. Nobody can judge you. I learned, which is hilarious. But I think, you just have to adapt. And you either adapt or die. And if you have a choice. And I think people are unconsciously making that choice every day with the policies they put in place, the people they hire, the way they're thinking about life. And I don't know if it's just people are thinking, oh, I'll just stick to my ways long enough until society changes, or I'll sell the company before it's a problem because, I won't have to hire these people, or I don't know. Maybe I'm sure I've thought some of those things too. But at the end of the day, those are just delay tactics for the inevitable.
Right. Delay tactics. I 100% agree. I mean, it's interesting when I work with companies or when I talk to potential clients, a lot of them are in fields that are a little bit more old school, a little more antiquated. Yeah. So it's just, businesses that have always been the same way. And those are the ones I'm seeing struggling the most with this because they're not being proactive. And I want to kind of turn towards, your experience with Fusion. And, obviously that was 10 years ago or 10 plus years ago when you started, and you've grown, grew so much in that time, but things don't change that often, right? It's like, it's communication, it's how you treat people. Like that has not changed. But can you go back to your experience with building this team and growing the team, and what did they want? What did the young professional hires that I guess were probably closer in age to you, but what did they want and what did they need to be successful?
Yeah. So I used to be a big fan of like HubSpot's culture code, the document they put out. And I think the most interesting thing from that I think Dharmesh wrote was, people want meaningful work. And I think that's like so true. Like they want to know that when they come to work every day, they're making a difference. But that's a pretty generic statement. I don't think that's true for everybody. I think there's a lot of different, I would say, personalities of people in the workforce. And so if you're running a construction company, you're going to have probably a different personality of people than you would if you're running a software company, that's filled with people under 25, that all write code all day long or something. Like it's going to be very, very different. And so there is really no one size fits all.
Yeah.
I think every strategy and policy and idea that I create or implement would probably have to be adjusted based on the personality of the workforce in different environments. But I don't think that's like an excuse to ignore those things because they don't exactly fit. I think you have to adapt them. So yeah, I think meaningful work is the biggest thing. So if I have to go to work, if I spend most of my life at work, then I want to know I'm making a difference. Otherwise, maybe I should adjust my standard of living, take lower pay, spend more time with my kids. I mean, there's a lot of alternatives that are going to make me happier. And I think the previous couple of generations, a lot of them, well, I wouldn't say a lot, but I would say like one of the previous generations, like let's say the greatest generation, right? World War II or whatever that segment is. I don't know it exactly, but that was like about survival. Like you worked to put food on the table. The times were tough. And so there's been a lot of different cycles as time has gone on. And so every one of those generations is going to react differently to advice and processes. And so, before it was like, you should just be happy you have a job that pays you this much. And now that argument just doesn't work. Like it really just doesn't for anyone under 30. And I would probably argue that pretty good, that if someone does think that way, they're just not telling you the truth. Like deep down, there's more to it than that. Right.
100%. And there's a lot of people out there that say, well, we shouldn't generalize based on generations. And while I 100% agree that we're actually, if you're on the upward side of the millennials, I'm at the very end. Like I'm the last year, I'm like right on the cusp. And, we probably react to things differently because there is that age gap in between. Just because we're in the same generation doesn't mean that we're the same, but it does help us understand the behaviors that come in the workplace. So I think there's a lot of value in that. And it's exactly what you just said. But I do want to come back. We said in your intro that you're an author. Yes, you wrote a children's book, but you're also writing another book, and you can share as much of that as you want. But what from your experience leading a team, and even your experience now leading smaller teams, what did that teach you, and how has that contributed to what you're writing about today?
Yeah, so the kind of the working title of my book at this point, I think, is like intentional hiring, and so We have a long way to go in it, and I think I have a lot to learn, and I'm applying a lot of the new things that I'm doing with hiring to the book now because it has been a few years. But really, to go back to your last question, I think it's not so much about applying one idea to a whole mass of people and thinking that's going to work. It's about just really thinking about it more in depth and being intentional about the decisions you're making. So it's almost the opposite. So it's almost like instead of saying, oh, well, Gen Zs just care about this, I'm going to give them more time off and more flexibility and less pay. Like you take personality assessments, everyone is very, very different. Like you can't just apply a blanket to that, but you need to be intentional about how you're thinking about it. So like I love doing personality assessments and interviews, but we do it in an extremely open and candid way. It's not one-sided because we want it to be a very safe environment. But we want to know like how are we going to work together? How might not we want to work together? If this is going to fail, what are the reasons going to be? And we're going to talk about that before we hire you, which is really hard to do.
Yeah.
Really hard. But it's like amazing when it works because when someone joins your company, you're productive on day one. It's really fascinating. So the book is really just about a lot of the processes that we built at Fusion with the help of a lot of other people that were there. And then also, now a combination of the new things I'm learning. So how do you just be so intentional about hiring people that, by the time the interview's done, they're begging to work for you because they've never met a company that cares so much about their well-being and intentionality and making this work. I think interviewing is a lot of times one-sided. So it's like, hey, absolutely, I'm going to see if you're qualified to work here. Nothing tells me you care about me more than that, right? Is telling me that's the requirement. And ours is more like, hey, you've got a lot of choices. We've got a lot of choices. And so let's find out if this is the best choice for both of us. And if it is, like, let's go create great things together. If it's not, let's find that out. So I don't want to relocate you across the country and fire you 3 months later, which I don't even really like that word, but
fire.
Yeah. I don't know. It's just an older word.
You like terminate?
No, it's like even worse. Yeah. I don't even know what I like. I like not having to do that. I think. Right. And so, that's a good answer. Yeah, and I think I think historically at Fusion, one of the things that happened is because our process was so intentional, there wasn't a lot of termination. It was more of we had more people self-selecting out. So either. I don't remember numbers. We had at least one person who told us, in an interview, I don't think I'm a fit for this. I think we should stop interviewing. And we were like, awesome. Thank you for telling us. Yeah. Like, here's a Starbucks gift card, like, or, whatever. Thank you for being here. Yeah. Just to show our appreciation for their time. And like, we wish you the best of luck. Right. Like, let's not use up any more of your time. Go off and find something that is a good fit. And then, we would be very intentional about after they were hired, kind of what that process looked like. So people that worked for us would know kind of whether or not they were doing a good job before we even knew it as management. And so, practically the way that looked in support is we took like our best, customer service representative and we said, what were they doing at week 1, week 5, week 20? And we documented that. And then we gave that. And this is something we would cover in the interview, but we also gave that to him and said, hey, this is kind of like your playbook. And at the time, this was something we developed out of necessity, but it worked really great as I didn't have time because we were growing so fast to follow up and meet with people. So I literally said, part of your job responsibilities is to review this document weekly and decide whether or not you're progressing and schedule meetings with people that can help you to achieve this if you're not achieving it. And so when you're that intentional about that document, what happens is that the people who weren't really succeeding and also weren't really assertive enough to kind of get the help they needed, or maybe it was, not the right role for them, they would select out very quickly. And, it was a very friendly thing. They would come in and say, hey, here's this document. we talked about it. I don't think I'm meeting this. And it's not always that simple. Sometimes we could kind of tell and we'd say like, hey, how's it going? By the water cooler. And they'd be like, oh yeah, it's going okay. And then maybe we knew it, maybe wasn't. And then we'd bring it up a little bit later saying, hey, like it sounds like you might be struggling a little bit here. And they're like, yeah, I might be. Okay, like, can I help you with anything? No, I think I'm good. And then, by the end of a few weeks, they were usually like, hey, this, may not really work. And, we were like, okay, well, why don't you go find a new position or role? And it was very mutual, like very easy conversation because we were on the same page.
Right.
See, when you terminate someone and they have no idea it's coming, that's a really hard conversation. That's when, people start crying, they get very emotional, they get very angry because, they just didn't see it coming. And there's other reasons for that too. But I think if you set it up the right way and the expectations are correct and they're managing it and they know it's coming and it's coming, it's a very, very easy conversation to have. And it's more of a supportive one. Like I can say, hey, I think you're right. I'm so sorry. Like we should have identified this. Let's help you transition to the next thing. Like what can we do for you to help you move into a role that works?
Right.
And just try to be as supportive as we can. So I could go on and on about that.
Yeah, no, well, there's a lot of things that I've been writing just to kind of pull out a few things for listeners and watchers. I mean, the biggest takeaway, I think, is all the things that you're doing not only are great retention tools, but they're also good recruiting tools because say you had that person who said, you know what, this isn't the right fit. You give them a gift card, they go away. They had a really pleasant experience with you, even though they didn't get the job and they decided it wasn't the right fit.
Yeah, we've had those people refer other people to us.
Yeah, they go refer. Yeah. I mean, it's a no-brainer. And so I think a lot of times companies really struggle to see the connection between recruiting and retention. And that's where a lot of companies, I think, fail. So I wanted to pull that part out and feel free to share your thoughts on that.
Well, I would say the kind of the working subtitle of the book is just like intentional hiring. And it's like, how do you build a hiring process that's so intentional and so great that after people start working for you, like they don't want to leave.
Right.
Because it really just carries over. So if you're really intentional in the hiring process, then you're also probably going to be pretty intentional in the onboarding process and then kind of further. And even if you're not, you've built a lot of goodwill. So when something does go wrong, they're like, you know what, we're all just really busy. It's not their fault. They're really trying. But when you start off, your first impression with an employee is you're just a number. Here's your salary. We're going to hard negotiate with you. We're not going to ask any questions about what you really want. It's completely one-sided. What type of company is that? It's exactly what they showed you at the beginning. And so then if that's the expectation when they come in, the first time stuff starts to go wrong, what's in the back of their head? And what's in the back of their head is, man, maybe this wasn't the right role. I don't know. Do they really care about me? There's posters on the wall that said, we value our employees more than anybody else, but like, I don't feel that. And so it's just, you're setting it up. I almost think for failure. And then you have the whole idea of quiet quitting, which I think, has been happening for centuries. And until now, we didn't have a word for it. Or maybe we did. I didn't know about it.
It was probably something else.
Yeah. So it's one of those things where, people do start to quietly quit. And they start kind of, at night surfing for new jobs and not working quite as hard and not being quite as engaged or thinking about work after work. And in some cases, you might want them to be. If you're growing fast, you need more time. Like there's just a lot of reasons why starting that way is just... If you think about it, why would you do that? Like, I want a candidate to be so impressed in the interview that, and this has happened, they'll turn down a higher offer to come work for me instead. And then I also had this happen. Someone come up to me and say, hey, I just wanted to let you know, I got a $15,000 higher offer from this company. And I just took the interview on a whim because they asked me to. And I just want to tell you that I'm not going to take it because I just love working here so much.
Wow.
Yeah, right?
That's what every boss wants to hear.
And not only that, but the person came and told me that.
Yeah.
Like that's like a level of trust. And I'm not saying I'm like the most amazing leader or the best at building trust. But I mean, that's incredible. But I think it's just... we kind of worked our way into that accidentally. Like we were so busy, we had to kind of build like a process to impress people.
Yeah.
We didn't have healthcare at the beginning. Try hiring people when you don't have healthcare. It's really hard. Yeah. And so how do you get people to come work for you even when you don't have healthcare? You got to do a lot. You got to do the 100 little things that impress them so much that the benefits seem to matter a little bit less. And that's what we tried to do out of necessity, but it ended up turning into this like beautiful thing that created this culture after the fact that I think a lot of people really enjoyed.
Yeah. Well, I think everything kind of comes back to communication as part of the intentional process. But I do want to get to another question because we're running out of time. I knew this would happen. Tell me.
Part two?
Yeah, we might have to have a part two. So what would you say, like, why do you think companies don't put the time into this? Is it because of money? Is it because of time? Is it because they're too big as a company? And it just, as you get bigger, it's harder to be more intentional. What would you say is the problem? Or is it a combination of all of those things?
Yeah, well, it's, the answer is never simple. I think it's a combination of everything. I think it's fear, and I think it's probably how difficult it is to change an established culture. So if you have a culture that's been established that works a certain way, it's really hard to adjust that, which I think is why you see CEOs come in and fire the entire executive staff and bring in all their own people, because like trying to get people to adapt is very difficult.
It's tough.
And I think some of it is for legal reasons. There are different ramifications legally if you're under 50 employees versus over. So I was talking to an IO psychologist who's a friend of mine the other day, and about some ideas, and she was like, those are fantastic, but like, they have to work differently for a company under 50 versus over 50 employees. And so I think what happens is you just look at all of those things, all of those hurdles and rules and, legal liability. And you start to think, is this like really going to be worth it? And so I think for a large company to adapt, it's extremely, extremely difficult. And I don't even want to pretend like I have the answer. Like I have no idea how you could make that work.
Right.
And there's probably some smart people who have, but it's hard.
No, and that's okay. It's just when people hear this, like business leaders hear this, what you're talking about, it's like, one, why are we not doing this? Like they're going to go to their recruiting teams and their HR team and say, what's going on? Why aren't we doing this? But I think it's probably we could probably have a whole episode just on that alone. I think it's worth exploring, but I do think it's a combination of those things from my side of the house and where I see companies struggling the most.
And I hope what people get out of my book eventually is, you don't have to adopt the entire process. You could pick, 10 out of the 100 things in the process and start doing them. And you're going to start kind of slowly changing the culture and making a difference. And I think if you pick the right things and you do them the right way and people start to see them working, I think it does start to slowly change. And a lot of times at big companies, change is really slow. And so that would be my recommendation to anyone who read my book who was like, oh, I'm going to go do all this. I'm like, please don't go do all of it. Like it's going to be really hard. Do a few of the things that you think will matter the most. Just the little things. And there's a lot of little things companies can do. Here's a good example of something I put in my book, and then I'll stop, is we never let anyone wait in the lobby alone at the front door. So what we said is, okay, they're supposed to be here at 11 for an interview. They're probably going to show up a little bit early. So somebody has to volunteer to stand at the front door and to greet them. So when they walk in the door or we meet them outside, they're never waiting. That's not hard to do. If you're a big company, you've got 600 people who could do that. And one of them can take the time. And so what that shows is like they walk in, hey, we're so glad you're here. Like we've been waiting for you. We're so excited. Thanks for coming. I've already got a cup of coffee brewed for you. I'll hand it to you if you want it. If you don't, then, we'll pass it off to another team member. We've got a water bottle. We've got a packet of things, like just really showing them that you care. And that takes a little bit of preparation, but like not a lot. And it makes such a difference. I mean, I won't say who it was, but someone recently that I was talking to that was interviewing, they walked in and they waited like 10 minutes by themselves on a couch before like the person at the front phoned someone to come and get them. And I'm like, that's just a very cold, impersonal experience. And it doesn't have to be that way. You can, at any size, any company, you can do that in just instantly start to change what things look like.
I love that example. And I remember, I think we talked about that at one point. It's just the little things that really do add up in a big way. And it could be the difference between somebody getting a $15,000 raise and choosing to stay with you. So again, recruiting and retention, all intertwined. And I think that is a really great way to wrap up the interview and the episode, I should say. But anything that you feel like we didn't cover today that really kind of speaks to this topic?
So much.
I know. We're going to have a part 2, everybody. Just wait.
Yeah, I would love to do that. I need my book outline in front of me to cover the hundreds of things that I've thought about. I think I would finish it up by saying just like take a first baby step. Understand that culture is changing, people are changing, and I think values are changing. So, people want to work remotely. They want to have more of a balance. They want to, just behave differently. And that's okay. And it's going to keep changing. So, what are some of the things that you could possibly do to really show those people that you care and you're working with them, that aren't going to, break the bank or be a big deal, and just start changing those things. And you can do it slowly. You can do it quick. But just take a step. I mean, that's, usually what everyone tells you, right? It's hard to take big steps, easy to take little steps. So just do that. And email me. Like, I've got hundreds of ideas.
Yes.
If you need one, email me and I will literally go through the outline with you. And
You really will.
Yeah, I really will. Maybe not the whole outline, depending on time. But just if you don't have ideas, email me, call me, find someone else who has ideas, ask your team. Like, the best question I've ever heard is like going to the team and saying, hey, like, we really just want to improve this place, but we don't know how. And we feel like for a long time, maybe we've been ignoring that and we want to make an effort, but we're scared of it. I mean, that's a very humbling way to say it. And then just say, give us ideas. What could we do to make this a better place? And the best way, my Whit Langstaff, my leadership coach, taught me this. The best way to get people engaged is to get them involved and to do that early. Don't give them 20 ideas on how you might improve culture. Ask them to submit 20 ideas on how you can improve culture. And that little decision alone of having them participate is literally a decision in itself to show the people that you care.
Yeah. And also make those, if they share feedback with you, make sure you actually are applying it. I think that's something that a lot of companies don't do.
Even if you don't apply it, right? What we do in our interview process is, if you take a personality assessment, my commitment to you is that I guarantee we will have a follow-up interview where you will get a chance to tell me what about that assessment is wrong. So if I ask you to take this, my commitment to you is we will have you in. You will get a period of time during the interview to kind of say what you like, what you don't like, what you agree with, what you disagree with. And so if you ask employees for feedback and they give it to you with 20 ideas, there may be a time where you can't do any of those 20 ideas. And so, saying, hey, when you submit those, what I'm agreeing to, the next step is we will meet about these and we will talk through these ideas to gather more information. And if we can't do these, I will try to explain the best I can why they're not feasible. And then from there, maybe you ask for new ideas. So you don't even have to commit to implementing them. You just have to commit to listening and caring and scheduling them time. And that in of itself, I honestly think makes a bigger difference than maybe implementing the 2 small ideas that you pick to appease people.
That's a really good point. I would not have thought that, because when you look at it, you just think, all right, we get the surveys, we want to adjust, we should apply what we learned. But I think your point makes a lot of sense, because that's the intentional piece behind it.
And here's the quick way to say it is, the best way to make people happy and make a great impression is to take a bad experience and make it better. So if you're a company, you screw up in customer experience, the best way to get a raving customer is to do a really good job of rectifying that and make it amazing. What you don't get raving fans with is just doing everything perfectly every time, shipping everything perfectly. You get raving fans by making things right when they're wrong. And so if you think about that logically, you're doing the same thing. You're not necessarily going to get everything right or implement the right stuff, but it's the process at which it happens that creates that feeling in people. And so I don't know. I think I would end with that.
Yeah, I think that's a great way. And we will be connecting you with our audience. So if our audience is interested in connecting and following up, we'll make sure we link all of that in our YouTube episode and our podcast. But thank you again, Derek, for being on the show. It's been really fun. And like I said, we'll schedule another one soon.
Awesome. Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you again for joining us on The Great Retention with Camber Parker. Before you go, remember this. Young professionals make up nearly half of the U.S. workforce today and are expected to jump at a rapid pace in this next decade. What will you do to help them become the great leaders that we need for our future? Join us next time for more information on how to recruit and retain young professionals. And if you enjoyed this episode, which I hope you did, please leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcast. This helps others know where to find episodes about this topic and more. And don't forget to share with your coworkers. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.